Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video in my Legion preparation series. Today we're going to be discussing how to choose a main, and for this video don't worry about actually seeing the video. I'll have relevant gameplay there, but this is more of an audio deal because there really is a lot to talk about here and graphics aren't going to help that much. So choosing a main is perhaps one of the hardest choices to make before an expansion, and it's the reason why this video is so damn late. It's been a real struggle for me as I find most of the game's specs to be really quite fun, and it has been a legitimately hard choice for me to make. We'll get into my picks and a run through of the game's classes in a bit, but first I want to talk about the process of choosing a main and how I went about it. So first of all, you need to think about how you're going to be playing the game. If you plan on doing world quests and the odd dungeon, then you really are free to just choose whatever you find the most fun. I'd suggest that you look at specs that have good sustain and lend themselves well to just clearing through hordes of mobs in the open world. And if you want some more of my thoughts on the game's damaging specs, I have actually done 2 roundup videos covering my thoughts on them. Now, when we start to think about ourselves as a part of a wider team, the factors that contribute to our choice actually change. If you're planning on being a high-end raider, then you're going to have to think about the composition of your team, what they need, and how the class that you choose fits into that. You also need to think about what kind of player you are and what you're expected to do. Is it okay for you to say, play a druid, but only play feral? Some people will be compelled, or indeed will be asked, to multi-spec into maybe a tank or a healer as well, something which adds a lot more playtime to your overall raid requirement. I suspect that while these are concerns that are talked about quite a bit, they're not actually felt by the majority of players because most guilds aren't pushing mythic progression, and I think they're happy enough to let their members choose a class and spec that they want to play and then work their raid composition around that. Anyway, much of this comes down to whether or not you want to multi-roll or not. There can be some great benefits to multi-rolling, playing both a tank and a DPS can be great. Even if you want to work in your DPS gear, you can still hop on the tank spec, set your loot spec to DPS, and, enjoy those fast queues. You can take advantage of additional loot bags from a dungeon if there's a call to arms for one of your roles. In general, you're just very flexible. The only downside is maybe being forced to play a role that you don't want to do, which is a problem that I've already addressed. Often I see people wanting to pick the best spec in the game and just main that. The goal of this video is to pick the most fun to play spec because World of Warcraft is a game and competitive rankings generally do fluctuate a lot, so it's hardly a responsible thing for me to suggest, and it's pretty short-sighted. Blizzard have recently said that due to the sunk cost in artifact power, they actually plan on being a bit more conservative with nerfs this time round, and that's worth mentioning for this video. So let's take the example of a mage. If fire was to outperform the other specs by a ridiculous amount, what they would do is they would tone fire down, but not to the point where other specs are better than it, and that's kind of the scope that they want to do their balancing. So at least they say it will be quite unlikely that you just wake up one morning, see hotfixes, and think, oh, I should have picked a different class or a different spec. That ideally should be less of a concern this time around. Another thing you have to think about is whether the class that you want to play has a spec that you hate. And in the event of that spec being the most competitive, will you feel compelled to swap over it? For some people, the answer is yes, and that might actually be a deal breaker. So look, much of this intro section has just been addressing personal playstyles, your attitude to the game, things like that. The choice that I make probably isn't going to be the one that you make, but overall what matters is the process and how you actually go about making your choice. So let's get right into it. First, my personal biases. I've been playing a hunter for years, so giving up the extreme mobility and utility that I'm used to raiding with is quite unlikely, and most of the time I sort of feel the sting of not having that if I'm playing another spec. I also don't really like playing casters a lot of the time. It's kind of odd since I've always mained a hunter in the past, but I really do feel that there is a gameplay difference between most of the traditional cloth-wearing classes and the hunter. Now, I normally find that melee specs are actually the most fun to play when it comes to a target dummy, but sometimes being a melee can be a little bit of a pain in the ass when raiding, so I generally try to avoid that. I plan to DPS in Legion as my guild has the other roles covered, and when it comes to raids, I like to be semi-competitive when it comes to my damage dealing, so I do try, I sort of try hard a little bit, And I also do like taking on additional tasks within raids. So as an example, High Mall was a raid that I really enjoyed because I was able to, bounce the balls and Chromog, do the flamethrower, deal with the buff and the final boss, and I really enjoyed all of that sort of additional gameplay. I'm going to start off with the specs that are out of the running in this video, and then I'm going to go through the specs that are all strong contenders. And then finally, I'm going to choose a main spec, and then the second and third characters that I bring to level cap shortly after the release day. So then, let's just get right into the ones that are sort of out of the running, and I'll just give a few words on each. So, starting off with the Paladin. Their specs are, in my view, pretty solid, but they're just not that exciting. It's not a case of the class being terrible, but there is just other stuff that I find to be more fun, especially since I don't plan on healing in Legion. Next, the Rogues. So they're a bit on the simple side, but I actually do find Outlaw and Subtlety to be quite playable. I mean, hell, even Roll the Bones can actually be quite fun. Their utility abilities are fun as always, but overall, Rogues just aren't making the cut in comparison to some specs which I enjoy more, and I suspect that perhaps the RNG of Roll the Bones might get a little bit annoying when it comes to raiding, however they have recently toned it down somewhat. Next, Priests. So Priests actually have one of my favourite DPS specs in the game with Shadow. I just love how it plays, and there's really good diversity with the two healing specs. I just don't really want to main a Priest though, for whatever reason. Look, we do have to just contend with our own personal biases, what we think plays, cool, what we think looks cool, and for me, I'm just not really feeling the Priest as a main, but if you do, I think it will be a really, really good choice that you'll enjoy. Next, Druids. So Druids are pretty darn great for Legion. Both Feral and Balance are really good DPS specs as far as gameplay goes. Resto is something that I've really always enjoyed, I just like its style. From what I hear, Guardian is quite solid too. Druids let you fill every role in the game. I don't really need to fill every role, just DPS, as my raid team already has the other stuff covered. So Balance is good, but I think I'll perform better as a marksmanship hunter. I'm just really comfortable with how MM plays. And while I really do like Feral, the likes of a Fury Warrior are just a bit more fun to me. So I suppose that for me, the Druid is a jack of all trades, and it's something that I can definitely see myself leveling up later on in Legion, but it's not going to be one of my first 2 or 3 characters. Next, we've got the Monks. So Windwalker is one of my favorite DPS specs in the game, which, yeah, I think that's pretty great. Thematically, the Monk isn't the strongest thing ever for me, though. Like, I really do like Windwalker, but it just doesn't blow me away as, just going away from the sort of the spreadsheet, is this fun to play sort of side of things, or, those two aspects, and then just going to the thematic one, it just doesn't really feel like something I want to play, I guess. But overall, Windwalker's great, so if you like the Monk Fantasy, you're going to be, I think anyway, you'll be quite happy with it. I haven't played Mistweaver, and I hear Brewmaster is in a great state, so again, I think if you like the idea of playing a Monk, then Monks are in a really good position, and, that might be a really good choice of a main for you. Moving on to the Warlocks, I just don't enjoy the Warlock specs that much at all. There isn't really much else to say about it. They're all functional, but if I'm to be a caster, I'd rather be an Elemental Shaman over any of them, so that's really taken Warlocks out of the running for me. And then moving on to the Mage, well, every Mage spec is in a great state. If you want to play a caster, the Mage is a fantastic choice. Why am I not picking a Mage? The look and feel of the specs isn't the most exciting to me, honestly, and it's kind of a pain in the ass when it comes to world content, especially in comparison to doing sort of hunter stuff or maybe most melee specs, like, say, a Fury Warrior or a DK, where you can just kind of cleave through stuff a bit mindlessly and, you can self-heal through things. Yeah, so Mages, like, if you want to play that niche, though, I think you'll be really happy with the Mage. Let's move on to the ones that are very close in the running, starting off with the Warrior. As I've said many times, Fury is one of my favorite specs in the game right now. It's simple enough, yeah, but it just feels great to play. I have seen criticisms of protection, but I've somewhat came around to it. I don't mind, and for the rare bits of tanking that I plan on doing, I think it'll do the job just fine. I've got no real complaints. However, Arms is my least favorite spec in the game. It's a spec that I just won't play, even if it performs decently, and I think I'm okay with that choice, and I don't think I would feel extremely compelled to, to play Arms over Fury, unless it was something ridiculous, in which case I plan on having other sort of max level characters. Next, we've got Death Knights. Blood is pretty cool, and I really, really enjoy both Frost and Unholy. They aren't that mobile, though, and that's something that I enjoy quite a bit. I'm used to a hunter, so that mobility really, I feel the sting of losing it. As I said, I like busybodying around the place during raids and stuff like that, so that's a bit tricky with the Death Knight, I suppose. I enjoy soloing on them, but I just don't think I'll enjoy raids as much as perhaps some other classes. Next, we've got the Hunter, so I cannot see Survival being a spec that I'll play seriously. Marksmanship works pretty well for me, though, when it comes to raiding. Oddly enough, I don't like playing a Hunter as much for world content, since some of the pet gameplay is a bit fiddly to me, but for raid gameplay, it just works really well for me, especially with Lone Wolf. I enjoy the mobility, and I enjoy being able to take on extra bits of raid encounters. Beast Mastery is pretty damn boring, though. I mean, it's kind of hard to do anything wrong with it, and it just doesn't feel that satisfying. That said, I can overlook dull target dummy gameplay that's a little bit brainless if it means that I can focus on the raid, doing fancy stuff, taking on extra tasks, and stuff like that when it comes to raiding. So yeah, there's two specs that I think I can play, one that I would really enjoy playing, and then there's Survival, which I won't play, but I plan on having enough endgame choices sort of anyway. Next, let's move on to the Shaman. Both Elemental and Enhancement are fantastic specs, and I think that anyone who enjoys the Shaman Fantasy will have a great time with them. Resto isn't really my cup of tea, and I don't plan on playing a healer as my main anyway, so overall the Resto Shaman, it ranks so highly on my list, but it's just not making the cut, just by the smallest margin overall. And then finally we have the Demon Hunter, so both specs are a little bit simple. Overall, though, I think they do work, and they can be quite fun when you're running through the world. I don't think I'll be super hardcore with it, but I think it's worth me keeping up to date with it since it's the newest class in the game. So yeah, there's all my thoughts on the different specs, and I'll just round it off with my decisions. I will still main a Hunter, regardless of my concerns over Survival. The playstyle works for me, and I can engage in the bits of raiding that I enjoy the most, the actual boss encounters. I want to be the person busybodying around, doing all those extra tasks, and that just works. BM is a little bit dull, Survival can be annoying, I'm happy to play a dull spec if the raid encounter is interesting, and chances that there are, the chances of there being a situation where Survival is the only viable spec are very low. So I think Hunters, for me, are a safe choice, perhaps a boring one, but one that I think will work for me. The second character that I will cap with is a warrior. I love Fury. I want to keep up to date with tanking and Legion as well. It also means that I will have options if I grow tired of the Hunter, since it's both a melee DPS and a tank, so things that are very different from a Hunter. I'm worried about a situation where Arms vastly outperforms Fury, so let's just hope there isn't a situation where both Arms and Survival are the top DPS specs in the game. I will have thoroughly played myself if it turns out to be like that. Then the third character that I will cap is the Demon Hunter. If I was playing purely for my own personal enjoyment, I would maybe think about this being a Shaman or being a Priest, but Demon Hunters are the newest class in the game, and as a content creator, I want to be up to date on how they play. I'd mainly be doing world quests and the odd dungeon, and both of these are forms of gameplay that I think are actually quite fun on a Demon Hunter. So there you go, that's my main choice decided, I suppose. That's how I'm going to be doing things in Legion. I've already worked out some good leveling plans, so I think within the first 2 weeks I'll have all of these at max level. Legion leveling doesn't take a great deal of time, and once you know the zones quite well, doubly so, it just doesn't take that much time at all. Though really my own personal choice isn't the important bit of this video, the important bit is just thinking about what we enjoy in the game and making our choice based on that, and, just sitting down and working it out. It took me maybe a week to come to this decision, and that, ranking of the three specs, or the three classes, that changed quite a bit for me. And, I finally got it down to a stage where I'm happy with it. It's the sort of thing that can change over time, but this is just my initial plan going into Legion, and we'll have to see how it pans out. So, yeah, I wish you luck when it comes to making this choice. It's a real pain in the ass of a choice to make, but it's definitely relieving to have finally made it. So that's it for me. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that at least me going through my process has helped you out when it comes to making your own decision. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.